my own as well. Um, and this is my definition. I use the term racism and white supremacy as synonyms. My definition of racism is a global system that is practiced, maintained, and controlled by people who classify themselves as white, who are dedicated to the domination, mistreatment, subjugation, and or abuse of people who they classify as not white, and that's especially black people. Uh, I've been addressing this particular point, the title of the room, why the logic of why I question white people about racism. I've been addressing this particular part of counter racism for a while now, so it's probably the best way to address family members, associates, different attempted counter racists who have been asking me different types of questions about why I question white people about racism. Um, without having to type back and forth on social media, etc., to address everyone individually by telephone. So hopefully this is constructive, and if followed, if followed, it should be able to frustrate the ability of racist man and racist woman to practice racism, if followed. Now, this sounds obvious, but to some, but I'm going to say it anyway. Anyone who thinks that this is non-constructive, don't waste a second of your time listening to this. Right? I only listen to things that are constructive. So the purpose, like I said, of this space is to hopefully inspire victims of racism, white supremacy to focus on the white supremacists and question them, since I've come to the conclusion that racist man and racist woman are responsible for, they run, and thus they know the most about the system of racism, white supremacy, what it is and how it works, much more than the victims of it. So I'll be asking questions like, I'll be asking these questions. I'll be asking, what type of white people do I question? I'll be asking and answering the questions because I don't really think I'm going to be taking questions. Uh, yeah. What type of white people do I question, and why do I do it? Is it logical? Is it logical to not question anybody just because one thinks that the person to be questioned may be practicing deception? Is it possible for racist man and racist woman to be honest about their and other white people's practice of racism? What do the white people who either deceive black people or are just plain wrong when they're talking about racism, white supremacy, what do those types of white people think of people like me who question them? Uh, does questioning suspected white supremacists in any way frustrate their practice of racism, white supremacy? And does it require a quantum number or an effective number of attempted counter racists doing the same thing in order for it to have more of an effect? Uh, Also, why do I think that some victims of racism, white supremacy don't question white people? I was also asked another question about, are you saying that the prisoners should question the prison guards and the warden if we're in this prison of racism, white supremacy? I think I'll answer that question. I'll answer that question last. Um, so with that, let me just get to some notes here. Right. So the first question is, let me just go here. Right. So, what type of white people do I question about racism and why. Right. I prefer to question less easily recognizable or less easily discernible suspected white supremacists, refined suspected white supremacists, the ones who pretend that they're not racist and or present themselves as working against racism. Why? I do that because a white supremacist who uses, let me see who, yeah, a white supremacist who racially abuses a non-white person all day long is easily identified by most non-white people, and most non-white people are suspicious of those individuals already. So it's a moot point for me to point out all of those white supremacists, the easily recognizable ones. The more deceptive, refined white supremacists fool and confuse non-white people into believing that they don't practice racism. So, so much more so that that a white person can suggest that they be looked upon with suspicion in a room full of black people under a system of racism, white supremacy, and many of those black people show and demonstrate very little, if any, suspicion of that white person at all. And another reason why I question those types of white people about racism as well is what if other victims of racism, white supremacy are helped to understand more about how racism, white supremacy works and how it's practiced with the use of words through listening to a white person being questioned by a non-white person using counter-racist questions? Yeah, I've had many different types of experiences of such learning by listening to questioning of the questioning of admitted racists such as Debbie Irving, Barbara Trepanier, Peggy McIntosh, Tim Wise, and the list goes on. Right. So all these interviews can be found by listening to the cows. By the way, Context of Racism, White Supremacy. It's a broadcast by Gus T. Renegade. Lots of these deceptive white supremacists have huge black followings. Right. Many black people who are not suspicious, who were not suspicious of those individuals, became suspicious after listening to those white people answering counter racist questions. So that's another reason why I question white people about racism. I think that increasing one's understanding of how racist man and racist woman runs the system may put us in a better position to eliminate it. So number two, I think that covers why. Like, sorry, what type of white person do I question and why? The second question is it logical to not question anybody just because one thinks that the person to be questioned may be practicing deception? Ask yourself, is that logical? And I've heard that quite a few times from non-white people about I don't question white people about racism because they usually practice deception. And I understand that. And I say you usually when someone disagrees with something or doesn't like something or doesn't like someone, etc., they usually explain why. They usually lead with the number one thing, the most important reason as to why they think X, Y, or Z is incorrect. They don't usually lead with I don't know, I don't eat tomatoes, for example, because of the way that they look. It's usually I don't eat tomatoes because of how they taste or because I've got an allergic reaction to tomatoes, etc. Why is that? Because that's the main reason, the most important reason. So the number one reason that I've been given by many non-white people for not questioning white people about racism is because of the expected practice of deception on the part of the white person. So let's explore that a little bit. If someone practicing deception is a valid or constructive reason to not question them, then what is the point of let's say, a litigator or a lawyer or a detective for that matter, a detective who specializes in extracting truth or revealing deception by using specialized specific questions designed to reveal deception even when that person doesn't want it revealed? I think the practice of racism is a criminal undertaking, right? And if that person I suspect of perpetuating or perpetrating that crime is using deception, I think it's logical to reveal the truth of that deception. I don't think there's a detective in the world who wouldn't question a suspect murderer, for example, because they think the person may lie. That doesn't make any sense to me. That's not logical. And A Few Good Men, for example, is one of my favorite films, right? And the Demi Moore character wants to put Colonel Jessup on the stand, played by Jack Nicholson. Tom Cruise is having a conversation with Demi Moore and the other lawyer in the room, and they say to him, just put Colonel Jessup on the stand and get it from him. How are they going to do that? If they know, right? How are they um, if they know Colonel Jessup will lie about ordering the code red, right? They are going to get it from him by asking questions. They're going to get it from, and they did end up, Tom Cruise ended up getting Colonel Jessup to uh, admit that, he ordered the code red. If you've seen the film, I do advise anyone to go and check out that film because it's an excellent example of how to extract the truth from someone who's practicing deception. You see, uh, the jury doesn't know that Colonel Jessup ordered the code red, and it's not enough for Tom Cruise just to walk into the courtroom and say he did it. In order for them to be convinced, the jury, they have to hear Colonel Jessup say it, right? It meets, I mean, I agree that many white supremacists do practice deception, but it's a massive difference if that statement comes from me, another black person, another slave. Um, most most non-white people receive that information very differently if I say it as opposed to if a white person says it, or better yet, has that deception or incorrectness exposed and extracted in real time by I guess, a slave on the plantation who uses counter-racist questions, whether the suspected white supremacist wants it revealed or not. It reaches the ears and the brain of another victim of racism, white supremacy, very, very differently. Um, so that's why I think it's still pertinent. I think it's still useful to question white people, even if we understand that they are going to practice deception. The other question is it possible for racist man and racist woman to be honest about their and other white supremacist practice of racism? I think the answer to that question is yes. But that is up to each individual victim of racism to determine. You will have to decide if the information that you receive from a suspected racist is accurate or not, right? Whether it's true or not true. I wouldn't be able to make that decision for you. I think that's up to the individual who's questioning that white person. Fourth question, does questioning suspected deceptive white supremacists in any way frustrate their practice of racism, white supremacy? And does it take an effective number or of attempted counter racists doing the same thing in order for it to have more of a desired effect? I've concluded yes. And I'm going to just read here from the textbook workbook for victims of racism, white supremacy by Mr. Neely Fuller Jr., which you can get by going to producejustice.com. Purchase a book. That's the United Independent Compensatory Code System concept. On page 131, he writes, a lie as a means of deceit is one of the basic tools of people who practice white supremacy, which is racism. The use of lies in a skillful, scientific, and masterful manner is the basic method that racists, white supremacists, use to confuse and subjugate the non-white people of the known universe. To speak the truth about racism by giving a detailed explanation of how a racist practices racism in each area of activity is one of the effective means of countering racism. A racist dreads having his or her lies and or deceitful activities exposed to large numbers of white and non-white people, particularly if the person revealing the truth and exposing the lies is a victim of racism, white supremacy, a non-white person. Racists usually become greatly, if temporarily, disturbed when their lies are exposed during a period of time when the lies must be believed in order that a particular plan to better promote racism functions effectively. And I think that's a great collection of words there by Neely Fuller Jr. And I think the reason that some white supremacists become disturbed and fearful is because if more non-white people become less confused about what racism is and how it works, then we understand a little bit more about how to eliminate it. If the white person is exposed as a liar or is just wrong, then many more non-white people may increase their understanding of what it means to be suspicious of any white person who is able to practice racism. Thus, that white person's particular method of practicing racism may be frustrated. But I believe it will take an increased number of non-white people to make that even more effective. Questioning them, becoming, I don't know, better skilled in the art of counter-racist questioning for it to be truly effective on a on a larger scale. I think that's important. So the other question, the penultimate question here is, why do I think that some black people don't question white people? I think that some of it is based around fear. If we agree that one of the reasons that racist man and racist woman have been able to dominate us for so long is because they are collectively, not individually, but collectively smarter than the people that they dominate. I think that some of the resistance to questioning white people has to be fear that it won't work. You know, that one will fail in their attempt to extract the truth from that suspected white supremacist, or fear of looking stupid or being ridiculed by that white person, even when we understand that that white person is wrong. Part of this is because we've witnessed, us as non-white people, we've witnessed confused or muddled or ineffective attempts by some non-white people who perhaps are not as skilled as they believe themselves to be at questioning suspected white supremacists. And like I said, it doesn't always work. With the best will in the world, sometimes it doesn't always work. But that is not a reason for not doing it either, in my opinion. I found that as one becomes a little bit more practiced and understands how to use more pertinent questions, then you can increase the likelihood of getting a better result in counter racist truth extraction. I'm just going to be using that phrase from now on. I have to look at the law of averages, right? For example, headache tablets don't work on everybody, but because they've been tried and tested, they're still being sold in stores all over the globe. Why? Because they are effective for many people and they do stop headaches for many people. Now, some people will point out, but smoking damages, some tablets just mask the reason as to why the headache has occurred, right? That's what I call not being able to see the wood for the trees, right? I just used a metaphor there, right? But some people will concentrate on the actual tablets and miss what I actually said before about law of averages and why that's still a reason to question people who are classified as white to reveal their racism. And that brings me on to the final question, final question and answer. I was asked by another non-white person, am I saying that the prisoners should question the warden or the prison guards? Now, that was in response to a tweet that I'd made about, describing the system of racism, white supremacy as a prison, and how, as non-white people, we could understand how that prison works, or we can gain a bit more understanding as to how racist man and racist woman run the system of racism, white supremacy through questioning them. Now, I thought that question, um, I thought by that question, does this person who's asking me this think that I'm actually talking about greater confinement or a literal prison with metal bars and doors, right? Or are they asking me about the prison for non-white people, which is the system of racism, white supremacy? Because there is an obvious difference, and my answer will vary accordingly. Obviously, when I use the prison metaphor as a type of analogy, right? I use that prison metaphor as a type of analogy to demonstrate who knows more about how a particular system is run. That's all that particular metaphor was designed to articulate, nothing more. Um, Now, I just assumed that when I made that statement, that it was understood that I wasn't talking about, I don't know, escaping from Alcatraz or Wormwood Scrubs over here. That's what I call not being able to see the wood for the trees, right? Words and phrases are greatly important when discussing counter racism, and I understand that. But and I can't emphasize that enough. Words and phrases are greatly important when describing counter racism. But I'm not pedantic. Pedantic means excessively concerned with minor details or rules, or being over scrupulous, right? In other words, not being able to see the wood for the trees and concentrating on a metaphor and the literal metaphor instead of actually concentrating on the larger point that I was trying to make. But yeah, and some just another thing as well. Sometimes it's not that I don't welcome questions. I do welcome questions. If I don't respond straight away, it's not because I think the question is invalid. Sometimes, I do have other stuff to do, so I don't get back to people straight away. Uh, but yeah, I do welcome all different types of questions. But on this, like I said, on this occasion, I have chosen to not take questions right now. This is more just a statement, just to address, like I said, different friends, family, colleagues, associates, etc., and other counter races who've asked me about why I question non-white people. Like I said, the main reason that people usually give for not doing it is because white people practice deception. And just to reiterate, I'm not sure that if the just the reason that someone practices deception is a reason enough to not question that person. I don't think that stands up to scrutiny or logic. In my opinion, just because a criminal who is practicing their criminality, someone you expect is going to practice deception, you might want to question that person to find out if they're guilty or not, etc., etc. But anyway, I think that's all I've got to say on why I question white people about racism. Thanks for everybody that joined. Uh, Please share this because I think it's constructive and I think it's important, just as a counterbalance to non-white people who don't question white people. And just to make it really clear, these are suggestions. This is my suggestion that more non-white people question white people. If you don't think it's constructive and you don't want to do it, don't do it. This is United Independent. Not everyone has to question white people. Not everyone is capable of questioning white people in a manner that it needs to be done. So only do these things if you find it constructive. I think it is for the reasons that I've just explained. So thanks everyone for joining. If you can share this space, that would be great. Thank you.